forcing things, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work in business. And being able to walk away from stuff and have that ability to receive very feminine energy, that's when stuff comes in, because then you're more aligned. You're able to co-create with the other energy of the world, with your clients, with your team, because you can receive versus forcing it to like go this way and do this thing and control.
Hello, I'm your host, Evelyn Clark, and this is the 6-Star Business Podcast, where we have conversations with amazing, incredible people all about what it takes to be 6-star, going beyond the status quo, doing things differently, and how they bring purpose, love, and impact into their businesses every day. In this episode, I sat down with Krista Chapman. She's the founder of a different kind of marketing agency in Nashville, Tennessee, in the USA. But our conversation was all about how we need to do things differently, starting with ourselves. It was interesting. I got to the end of the conversation and I realized I was so wrapped up in what we talked about, I forgot to ask her the $1 million question, which is, what does 6-star mean to you? And yet I realized that we'd talked about 6-star the whole conversation. She would have answered pretty much the same thing that she gave us in this episode, all about how we really need to figure out what is unique to us. What do we individually need to make our day, our life, our world amazing? And that's different for every person. So making a difference in the world really does start with ourselves. And that was the essence of this conversation, with so much more in it. It truly was a beautiful conversation. And she brought out so many new, interesting and thought-provoking concepts that are very real, very relevant for every business owner, every entrepreneur, every person. There's something in this for all of us, and it's definitely one that you'll process for a little bit longer after you've listened. So please enjoy this conversation with Krista Chapman. Hey, here we are. It's another episode of the 6-Star Business Podcast. I'm here with Krista Chapman. How are you doing today, Krista?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to sit and chat with you and dig into all this stuff.
Awesome. I'm excited too. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. I would love to get to know you a bit better, and as will do our listeners, I like to ask my guests a few questions so that we can get to know you. So could you let us know where are you in the world, and who do you serve? How do you serve them? And what's something you like to do when you're not busy serving people?
Yeah. So I am currently based in the U.S., southern U.S., in Nashville, Tennessee. So most people know that for the country music here, though not why I live in Nashville. I actually founded a marketing agency about 10 years ago called Path and Compass. And we primarily work with independent and mid-sized businesses. I prefer the ones that are a bit more thoughtful and a bit more willing to kind of dive into the deep stuff, mostly in the event and wellness and creative service industries. As a marketing agency, we help them with their marketing. So, but I like to say that we really, our work focuses on helping clients connect with their ideal client, but doing it in a way that allows them to create a successful business on their own terms, because which oftentimes that requires a lot more introspection, a lot more, thought. But in doing so, I believe it allows you to create a more sustainable business and a more fulfilled life. And so we do that more practically through website design, branding, content creation, business coaching, all that kind of stuff. And many of our clients are really long-term as well. So that's kind of the nitty-gritty of who we serve and what we do. But when I'm not serving people, and what do I like to do? This year has been really interesting because this became my year of rest. And I think after 10 years of grinding and working and building a business, you sometimes forget to do things like that. And so rest is really been a big thing of what I've embraced, and whether that's through self-care or reading. So I'm a bit of a self-awareness junkie in some respects. So I also am kind of expanding other little hobbies and things like that too. I find that a burgeoning plant family in my household, which has kind of come up in the last year as well. So those are some of the things I like to do when I'm not working.
Everything you've said, I can relate to, especially the plants and a year of rest and self-care, and but even in the workspace, what I love what you said is helping these independent business owners create businesses on their own terms, and it's what's right for them, and focusing on the ideal client, which is something I do around that with my clients. And I would love to learn a bit more about that. Because as a marketing agency, I mean, marketing, there's a stigma around marketing, right? There's as you know, and I wonder that what was the spark that drove you to create this marketing agency in the first place?
Yeah. So let me back up and say that my background is actually in event design and planning. I did that for like a decade, almost 15 years. Got burnt out, as you do, hit my quarter life crisis and was like, what am I doing with my life? And am I really happy? And I started to really kind of look around at business and how we were doing business and how business was really like eating my peers and myself alive. And and this was also at the same time when social media was becoming a thing. So you as a business had to have social media accounts. You had to really look at content marketing. That was new for a lot of businesses in the 2010 timeframe. And so those two things I started to look at and realized businesses, especially smaller businesses, have an opportunity to start changing the narrative. And at my core, I believe that capitalism is the culture of America in a lot of ways. And business is the culture of America. And because that's the case, marketing can be really, really good and really, really bad. And I felt like there's got to be a better way that we can present marketing, or that we can work with clients to help them build companies and utilize, these now really available platforms to share their truth in an affordable way, so that we can start kind of challenging a little bit of that, dialogue, and look at why we're saying things the way we are, why we're using fear to motivate people, and sort of shift that. And so that really became the spark, that I just wanted to help businesses do things better and do things differently. And I chose marketing because, to me, it was a skill set I had from having worked in event planning and having done that. There was an opportunity with this content marketing space, and I felt like it was the way that you could really make a big impact, because you can really, it was a very powerful mic for a lot of small independent businesses. And so that's where a lot of what drove me came. And I think that perspective is really different from a lot of marketers. I don't have a background in marketing. I never got a degree in it. I don't have a business degree. I'm sort of a mega observer, and I'm constantly watching people and, questioning things. And I think that those things just started to kind of work together. I do very much love the possibility of what business can do for people when it's handled correctly, or when it's handled maybe more thoughtfully, versus when it's sort of handled haphazardly, as we've done for so many decades. And that's really how it came together for me. And so it was much more about how can we just present a different path for people and be that guide to them to say, you can find success, you can be profitable, you can make a ton of money, and not do all the things that everyone says you must. And that, I find, resonates with a lot of people, thankfully. And I so believe that the more people we can activate, because we all have these really great ideas inside of us and, desires to make the world a better place, but we don't know how to communicate that to people. And so that's what I really like to help people do, is communicate that in a way that doesn't allow the business culture to kind of overtake that. So I suppose I'm an outsider in a lot of ways. But because I don't have a background in any of this stuff, it's just been like, well, this is the kind of life I want. So let's just make that bigger, because I think other people want this kind of life too. And that speaks a little bit into the rest and into the, the ideas of like balance and things like that, which I could talk about for forever.
There's so much to unpack there. When you launched the business, how was it received?
So I launched more as a freelancer, and then it grew over time, and it was really interesting. That's a really interesting question. I took a bunch of freelance gigs, and I had the kind of personality that was just like, hey, I'm noticing this in your business. Can I help with that? And just kind of forced my way in. And other people, I worked in the event and wedding industry. That's where I targeted initially, so I knew that industry. But I had other vendors that were watching what I was doing with this one vendor in particular. And they were like, can you do that for me? Can you do that for me? And so it sort of spread organically. And it's funny because some of those clients I still work with to this day. But it was a very organic way that things kind of was received and the way that it started. And then over time, I found myself really getting surer and surer about, yes, this is the message. This is what I want to present. But at the same time too, you kind of wander off that path a little bit, because the siren song of business, pulls you over to, well, maybe you should, create a course. Maybe you should do this. And it has taken me a long time to kind of keep coming back to center. And I think that that's something that business owners and entrepreneurs and people who desire this kind of impact really have to be mindful to do over and over again, because it's so easy to just kind of go to where you think you're supposed to go, based on all the messages and things we get to us, because marketing's good.
Yeah, we need to market, right? And what you just raised there is it's big, and I love that we're diving straight into this, really into the deep topics. You mentioned being pulled back away into the status quo, into the norm, what the masses are doing. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, there was a long time because the primary role I play in my business now is really as like the coach, the lead strategist, and the person who sort of sees the big picture. And I have a team that helps me with the more kind of individual things. And I've always really played that role. So when you are a thought leader, you're supposed to have a book, and you're supposed to have, a course, and you're supposed to scale, and you're supposed to. And it really wasn't until COVID, which was a huge slap in the face to a lot of us, myself in particular, even as a marketer, because we were so heavily invested in the event industry, which just got decimated during that time frame. And I watched friends who had multi-million-dollar businesses collapse, and it really has you thinking about things and questioning the system, and like, well, what the heck? Like, you want me to do all this stuff? And then it turns it around. But it was at that same time that I really started to realize that the reason why I created a business was not so that I could be this person, have this influence. It was selfishly because I wanted a certain lifestyle. And it took me a really long time to admit that, because we're expected to like be so impactful. We're creating this because we want to, help all these people and do all these things and change the world. And I think you can do that by choosing yourself, because so much of the world wants us to just give until there's nothing left, especially women. And that was kind of what I got swept up into. It's like, well, maybe I should be putting out more stuff. Maybe I should be giving more to people. But there was this constant tug of like, no, I want to do really good work for the people that I can help, and I want to activate them, and I want to help them, build the businesses that make sense for them. I want to help my team, but we all have different definitions of success for ourselves. And there's not different definitions of success in the business world. And so that is what I think became, the challenge. And it was really COVID that like opened my eyes to that, because that's when the sort of like the curtain was pulled back and you're like, nobody's in charge. You can do whatever you want. And it gave me the courage to be like, no, I'm doing this because I want this lifestyle, not because I, want to be the next Oprah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And what about, you said then, what about, impacting yourself, like doing it for yourself first as well? Because then if you're doing it for yourself, then of course you're going to be helping others. Is that the notion that first honor what you need and then you're able to serve others in the most balanced way?
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it. I think that there's such a denial of human wholeness in business culture. Business wants us to be machines. It wants us to work. There's such focus on productivity and scalability, and none of those things are very adaptable to the human existence and our need for rhythm and our, the fact that we're really part of nature in a lot of ways. And I think that that's something that, when you're talking about reclaiming yourself, we as business owners, entrepreneurs, professionals, in a lot of ways are required to put on a mask and a role and present in a certain way to appropriately exist in the business culture. And all these other elements of our wholeness are not allowed because they don't fit, because they're messy, because they're inconvenient, because they're not productive, et cetera, et cetera. And this is especially the case for women, because women even more so, if you go back to, we were asked to basically become mini men. You're allowed to work. You're allowed to have businesses. You can do it in the way that men do it. And we're not, we don't want any of this like woo-woo, touchy-feely stuff. Just put on your shoulder pads and like be mini men. And that is fine if we all want to give up our human wholeness. But what I'm realizing more and more and more is you will never reach fulfillment if you do that. And that's kind of why we do this. That's why I did this. It's why I started a business. I was looking to have a more fulfilled life. And it was really just sort of realizing the necessity to balance our wholeness and to bring that into the business world, to allow that to scale in your own lifestyle, in your own team's lifestyle, in your client's lifestyle. That's the kind of stuff that like just I love. I think that there's so much power in it. And it goes back to reclaiming yourself. And it's really an act of resistance. It's an act of like, I'm not participating in the system because the system is set on destroying humans. Because the system is built that way. And sure, you can argue at both sides and things like that. But I really think that it really comes down to, yes, you can work one way, but I'm fairly certain you're never going to get to that place of content, filled happiness, because the machine is going to constantly move things and move the goalposts forward. You're constantly going to be chasing. You're constantly going to be told that there's one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. And you're never going to actually be able to just be in the juice of it unless you decide to. And that's where the reclaiming of yourself, I think, is so key and so important in how we can do business differently, how I am really choosing to do business differently now. But really, I mean, if I'm going to think big, this is how we save the world. I mean, this is the kind of like big thinking stuff that I think we need to bring more and more into our culture of business. And in our approach. So
I so resonate with everything you're saying. And I know our listeners are probably, some of them will be jumping up and down with joy at this, and others, it'll be new. You know, it's a new paradigm. So talk me through, please. How is it different? Like, you know, if someone who has never come across this notion before about bringing wholeness and rhythm and honoring the self and not, you know, fitting into that box of the mini men paradigm, they might be questioning, well, what does it look like? What's the everyday? What does that mean? Can you share, like, how has it changed for you when you embrace this, and what is it? And obviously you talk to your clients about this as well.
Great question. Let me back up and just say, to those who are like having the response of like, I don't know about this. This is all like, get curious about that. Where is that story coming from? Who created that story for you? And does it really align with yourself when you really dig in there? Because we so often, you know, there's lots of defense mechanisms to, you know, maintain the status quo. And so if what I'm saying is starting to make you feel a little anxious, that's great. Yes, let's go there. Get curious about that, because there's some juice there. And I'm going to speak for myself and how I've approached things differently. But I think it's really important to go back to the key thing I tell everybody: got to be your terms. And so if what I'm saying doesn't resonate or doesn't land with you, like, drop it. Like, it's just, like, if you don't want to do what I'm doing, find the thing that matters to you, and go with that. But I think one of the things that really, and I go back to this idea of rest, because it's so taboo to rest in business, and stop, and to not be constantly pushing and going. And so for me, that started when I went on retreat in January of this year. It's just myself. It was going to be a personal, like, let's plan out the business for the year weekend retreat. And I got there the first day and I realized I was utterly exhausted. And I think really it was left over from COVID. I think so many of us never really truly have like kind of integrated that. Like, we went from like insanity to, okay, oh my God, the market's opening back up. Like, everything's open again, way faster than a lot of us were expecting. And there wasn't this time to sort of like deal with the trauma of that and just the intensity of that. And so that got pushed down and it hit me when I let it. And I kind of looked around and I thought, you know, why not? What if I just rested a whole year? And it was like, at first it was like, are you insane? How dare you think that? There's so many stories that flooded in, like, why I couldn't. And I let them be there. And I think that's a key thing. When these stories flood in, you got to let them be there. And then you got to start to dismantle them. And you got to start to open to creating new stories and writing new scripts. And that has been a practice for me. So I journal a lot, and that really helps me when I'm trying to figure out, you know, where I'm aligned and where I'm off. But to journal, we have to be able to imagine. We have to be able to imagine a different life, imagine a different way of doing things. And when you are exhausted, there's no capacity to imagine. You just accept. And that's why so many people are caught in the rat race on the hamster wheel, because they're exhausted. And the system works tirelessly to keep us exhausted, because then we can't ever escape. And so nap, take baths, just quit your day early. Like, I started doing all those things almost as an experiment. I was like, if I work less, could I make more money? Could I make the same amount of money? The answer is I can make more money working less. And I started to really just incorporate that into my schedule and my day and get a lot more strict about not answering emails after hours, not checking emails out on the weekend. I scheduled out a bunch of this whole last year. I've had retreats almost every single month have been scheduled in. And I just sort of actively did it. And I approached it as an experiment to kind of test whether or not it would work. And that was how I was able to integrate it. But for me, it's a lot of self practices around really recognizing the idea of capacity. I think is the first step, and recognizing that our capacity is not endless. And so often we're like, our gas tank is like below E, and then we're still like dipping into it. And so even when we do rest, we are really only coming back up to like 10%. And we're never actually allowing ourselves to fully rest. And so just kind of having awareness around capacity, I think, can be really informative. And once you're able to do that, I think then you're able to start to notice, you know what, my body's tired. I'm going to go take a nap, or I'm going to just go rest, or I'm going to just unplug for a little bit. And I'm going to start to find things that help energize me. So for me, I like taking baths a lot, which was something that past me was like indulgent, waste of time. You're going to sit in hot water. Are you crazy? You got shit to do. So it was really like a big thing for me to like, no, I'm just going to lay in bath. And it was also like wasting water. That one comes in too. But I find it really energizes me. My body's very lined with water. And so whereas other people might find it like dance or movement, is kind of their thing. So I think that really just sort of taking this idea of like figuring out, capacity. That's a thing, that you have a limited tank that has to get refilled. And then recognizing where that sort of is throughout your day. And then also recognizing what are the things that I can do to refill it. And how can I incorporate those in small little ways? And the other thing I'll say about this too, and I need to give credit to Trisha Hersey about this. She's based here in the United States in Atlanta. She is the founder of an organization called the Nap Ministry. She's like the goddess of naps. And she talks about how we also need to reimagine what rest is. Because so often people get caught up in the idea of like, well, I can't take a 2-hour nap. I got stuff to do. Of course. But there's lots of other ways that we can rest without having to like, fully dive in, in our jammies mid-afternoon, with like our eye mask on and like sleeping and things like that. There's lots of other things that we can do. And so that's where it's like, what is the inventory of all the ways you recharge? And how can you find little pieces? And sometimes it's even just like, for me, it's been a lot of like incorporating more elements of pleasure into my space, into my life, because I was for a long time, very heavily in that go, grind, hustle, productivity mode, that all of these things felt very indulgent to me. And so there was never time to light a candle. There was never time to get a fuzzy blanket. Like, we just don't have time. We got stuff to do. We got emails to answer. I got to, make that money. And I found that when I started to incorporate those things, everything just got a lot easier. And that was a really cool, like, side effect of this experiment, where I was just like, oh, I do have time for all this, because by doing this, it recharges me and I have more energy so that I can create more things. I'm not wasting this energy in productivity leaks, arguably, and not in the sense of like I'm not being productive, but I mean sort of like uber productive, and it's like wasting energy, like checking my email like 15 times, that kind of stuff. So that's some of the things that I have really kind of leaned into personally, and how I take care of myself personally. I think when it comes to spreading the news, it's still a little scary for me to talk about this stuff, because it's so like, ooh, I don't know. And so I try to kind of drop it in when I feel comfortable. But with clients, you'll get them to talk about like, well, they'll say something and I kind of will jump on it. And a lot of times what they say is like, well, how can we do this easier? Or what's a simpler way? How could we, I just want to find something. And that's really an opportunity to say like, well, here's, yes, ease. let's embrace the idea of ease in business, which arguably, and everything I'm talking about here really is in the feminine energy. Whereas business, as we have created it and we have manifested it for the past 70 years, has been heavily in the masculine energy. And yes, that is very productive. It is very stable. It is very driven, but it's not very balanced. And it's not very accommodating to the human wholeness that I believe we need to connect to. And so, a lot of what I'm talking about is really about like, ooh, what's this whole feminine energy space that I could explore and expand? And also, how have I been rejecting it because it is essentially worthless in our culture, patriarchy, all that kind of stuff. But that's really what you're sort of expanding, and in that rebalancing of your nature, I think creates the abundance of energy that then allows you to do things bigger but way more easily. That was a lot, but that's what I got.
That was a lot, but it was absolutely fascinating and riveting. I had a couple of questions which I think you kind of answered. One was, if someone was listening to this going, well, how can you rest? And then, so walk away from the office or the desk and then you get more done. And what I heard you say was because you're recharged and you're re-energized, when you go back into into your workspace, you have better thoughts, better energy, better use of your energy and time. You get things done quicker, smoother. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think that really ties into the idea that, and I do this with my team a lot because I have a team of creatives, a lot of graphic designers, and creativity is kind of a burst energy. It's a sprint energy. And you'll have this creative burst of something, but then the legs get tired and you got to stop. And trying to like continue to burst the creative energy doesn't work. And so oftentimes if any of my team is ever getting stuck with something, or if I'm finding that I'm stuck with something, it's like walk away, just take a break, reset your mind. And then when I come back, it's like it all kind of spills out. And I think most creatives will relate to that like it's that flow state that is very intense. And you're birthing ideas, and giving birth is not, I mean, of course, it's the long haul, but it's also, there's this intensity at the moment. And I think that's where, why that rest is important, or the walking away from and coming back to, because it allows you to reset, and not get caught in like, well, if I just keep pushing through, I'll get to it. You'll get to it, but it's not going to be as good as if you walked away and came back fresh. And that I think is really a key thing. And I think that just better honors the rhythm of our body and just the way the creative process more naturally wants to work versus trying to force it to work. And that has been a huge realization that business culture does not allow you to know. It's like, spoiler alert, forcing things, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like it just doesn't work in business. And being able to walk away from stuff and have that ability to receive very feminine energy, that's when stuff comes in, because then you're more aligned. You're able to co-create with the other energy of the world, with your clients, with your team, because you can receive versus forcing it to like go this way and do this thing and control. Huge skill. It's an area a lot of people struggle with, because how many business owners we talk, have heard, they struggle to ask for help. They struggle to delegate. Receiving is another even layer of that. It's one thing to ask for help. It's an entirely another level to then receive that help, especially for women.
You talked about COVID And, I totally agree with what you said about how we really didn't have time to integrate the trauma. And it was, like you said, very quickly, oh, we're back into things. Oh, market's up. Here we go. And off we went. And everyone was jumping in again. And yes, and I noticed that there was people continued to talk about it and try and sort of bring it in. But those that had businesses that changed as a result of COVID were probably better placed to integrate because they had to. They had to go through their own process and traumas and difficulties. But I really love what you said. And I wonder, after we got back into things and you were back working with clients and potentially new types of clients because the event industry was so decimated, did you notice any male-owned, male-run business owners seeking more of that balance? Had their perspective shifted at all, or were they more open to that feminine or that wholeness around who we are as people?
I think that I've always attracted those types of men. We work primarily with women in our business. Most of our businesses are women-owned, ours included. So I'm not sure that I saw any difference before and after because I've always sort of attracted those men. I will say though that women struggle with this. I think women actually struggle more with this embracing because we've been so conditioned and to work extra hard to prove ourselves. And that I think is where they oftentimes need a lot more encouragement and support to. A lot of the women we work with have amazing ideas and have really impactful perspectives, important solutions. They are terrified to say them out loud. And they're afraid of what that means. They're afraid of evolving that way in their business or pivoting to this kind of inner thing that's calling them to go this direction. Because, that's going to isolate somebody, or, somebody's not going to like me. Because, of course, as women, we have to like, please everybody. And so COVID, I think, with women, and the weird thing about COVID with women is it pushed so many women out of the workforce. And a lot of business owners, I think, that we worked with, there was definitely some that happened to, where the businesses didn't make it. But I think that there is this inner longing that got louder because of COVID. And I think a lot of women were like, this is really starting to kind of thump more than I had realized in the past. But I'm still really scared of it. And so, and that I think is something that I really try to work with on clients, is that that's natural. It's normal. What you are saying is hearsay. This is blasphemous. The system doesn't want any of this to get out. So of course it feels really terrifying to you, but it's still right. And it's still important. And oh my God, the world needs the important solutions that women have right now, more than it ever has. And so I think we as facilitators that can help kind of midwife that birth, so to speak, is really important. But there still is a lot of fear and anxiety that come up for women in that space because they fight it. And I think, we hear this so often that women are harder on each other than men are. We are each other's enemies more so. And it's because we're trying to keep everybody in line with the rules of the patriarchy. And when there's a lot of women right now that want to step out, and we have all the turmoil, so to speak. But I think COVID was a big catalyst for that, because it was if not now, when?
Yeah. Okay, so for the female listeners who are listening to this going, wow, yep, that's me. Yep, I resonate. Oh my gosh, yes, that's how I've been. That's how I run my business. Oh my gosh, yes. You know, there are probably lots of bells going off and ticks. What would you say to them about how they can start to dismantle, you know, the structures and the paradigms that they've adopted? Because to me, it's massive. This is entrenched in our society. It's part of our upbringing as well. It's in our school education systems. We've grown up with this. What advice do you have for the female business owner who's listening to this now?
Well, let me just first say that I'm still figuring it out. And I was very much in there. And even as I was a women's studies major in college, I've been a feminist since teenager, you know, like I have been well educated in this stuff for a long time. And I still had the cloak fully over my eyes in a lot of ways. And I still kind of swept into a lot of stuff. So I think that a ton of compassion for this, because it's really hard to know that you are swimming in toxic water, or you're breathing toxic air when it's all you've ever only had access to. There's no way to know that anything was wrong. So much stuff is normalized in our culture. Now, I will say that younger generations seem to be much more aggressively and rapidly dismantling of this, which is like, thank you. But it's, I think, harder for those of us who are a little bit older. You know, I'm 40 myself. I'm in that older millennial space. And I think, you know, we had a very different upbringing experience of what was allowed. So the thing that I will say that helped me the most, first of all, I connected with a coach and a support group on this very thing. And so that was really key and helpful for me personally. But the thing that was really eye-opening for me about that was this idea that this is traumatic. It's traumatic to, you know, live the patriarchal experience, sort of have that, and that impacts us in like death by 1,000 paper cuts for a lot of women. And I think a lot of women say, no, I had a perfectly normal childhood. You had a perfectly normal childhood in destructive systems that want to oppress you, be them patriarchy, racism, ableism, ageism, colonialism. All of those things are working to dismantle humanity. And so, in our individual humanities. And I think that recognizing that is a first step. That was a first step for me, because I was like, everything's fine for a long, long time. And then I think working to build, it's almost like you're going through like a trauma program. Like it's like working to build safety and working to understand your feelings and really reconnecting with your body, because I was cut off. And I think that happens very commonly for business owners and for women who are professional, is that we stay in our head all the time and we're not paying attention to anything going on down here. And that's why we have no idea we're burning so far past our capacity, because we're not in touch with it. So for me, it like was this practice of like, what's down there? And how can I go down there and not be terrified of it? And it was working with a coach, therapist, and a group program that really kind of allowed me to do that. And I think, you know, most of us as business professionals and owners and entrepreneurs are well versed in investing in ourselves, but we'll do it in the professional way. And I would challenge and say that the more that you develop in your own invest in your own personal development, the better your business will be by default. It just is a domino effect. The better you are able to feel your feelings, integrate those feelings, regulate yourself, know yourself, business stuff just becomes so much better. And again, you're able to stay more aligned, which then makes all that more, you know, more impactful and just better. So much better, richer.
I love that. Love all of that. And one common thing that has come up on the podcast, certainly the last few months, is the notion that people have to do the work, this inner work.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is a lot more inner work, not just understanding who you are, but going back and looking at, the bits that we push away or we refuse to look at, because that's part of this prison of conditioning that we've created or we've been brought up in. And I'm sure that people listening to this would be hopefully thinking about this and going, wow, what would it feel like if I didn't have those prison walls around me? Mm-hmm. What would it feel like? And I want to put that out there and encourage people to actually ask themselves that question. How would I feel? How would my life be if I wasn't subject to this feeling that I must do this? I have to do it this way. And dare to question, what is the right way for you? What feels right?
It feels delicious. It's like, I haven't got it all figured out, but the things that I'm starting to see, I'm like, oh, this is real delicious. But I want to speak one thing to the thing about doing the work, because I think that one thing that I found through my work is that there's a lot of handing it over to the energies of the universe. You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to dissect it all. You don't have to dismantle it. You don't need a business plan for it that speaks to 17, you don't have to have the, fully mapped out plan. You can just, and this again, feminine energy, you can just trust and receive. And there's a lot less efforting in that when you get to that point and you're able, so the work is really about like removing the guards of your prison so that you can then just receive. And you can get pretty adept at, working with those guards and evolving them and whatnot, because it's certainly, I think, I'm not a trauma specialist by any means, but my experience, you do realize that all of these adaptations, all of these stories we tell us, all these rules that we hold ourselves to, were put in place because they allowed us to belong better in our families, in our culture, in our society, and to be safe. And safety is important and it's overlooked. And it's really what is operating at a subconscious level for us in so many different ways. And it's really why women are not sharing their grand visions to save the world, because it doesn't feel safe. And rightfully so. When you see every day, we see women who get, cut down for speaking out and standing up. Of course, it's not safe out there, but it can be safer, and there can be ways to do it safely, and that honor where you are and where you want to be. And that is, for the work, I think, is more about figuring out that, and then working with the stories and the narratives to kind of open up. It's not constant churning of like work. There's a lot of ease once you kind of start to peel those stories back, because you're like, well, I can make up whatever I want. I can say business is easy, and I do all the time, and it is. And then it's funny how and it is, So I think that's an important thing too, is that you really get to define the narrative in a lot of ways, because there's no rules in entrepreneurship. We are all making this up. We are all creating our own systems, our own processes, our own plans. Nobody's like checking our work, making sure that we have the right things. I mean, sure, there's certain situations where you need funding or whatnot, but sometimes you don't. You can go different ways, make your own rules. So that's the beauty of this. And so it's like you're already primed to do this work on yourself and peeling back these stories and rewriting the narratives, because you've already been doing it in your career, because you didn't stay in the 9 to 5. You didn't stay in the corporate ladder. So you're more skilled at this than I think you realize.
Great piece of advice. Love that. I'd like to ask you about purpose, and what does purpose mean to you? in business and in life?
I love that question. I think a couple things about purpose. There's a lot of stories that come with purpose that immediately are downloaded in once you sort of bring that idea of like, what is your mission? What is your purpose? Well, purpose must be impactful. It must be this. It must be big. As I've been through this process and I've been working through these things, I've realized a couple of things. There's two kind of main ways to get to your purpose. You could have a very linear, direct way. You know what your passion is. You go after it. This is it. I think of like Taylor Swift is kind of like that with music. And then you have the quest path to purpose where you meander and wander, and take detours, and stay maybe here for a while before you find the place. And the purpose becomes more journey driven versus more end result driven. One is more valuable than the other in this culture. Most people don't like people who wander and don't see that as valuable. But I personally think that there's a ton of value in it. And I think that it allows you to leave space for how your purpose will evolve with your experience as a human and your life stage and your interests and desires. And I think that the more that, since that's where I think you have to sort of, again, go back to like what feels more aligned to me. And you might have times where there's like direct paths and then we go back to wandering again. And I think it's opening up the story to like, what is the right way to purpose? And what is the right way to find your purpose? I am much more of a wanderer. I always have been, even though I've definitely tried to like be really direct. It's just never worked as well. I very much like to let things come organically to me and sort of follow more instinctual kind of gut feelings. But I think it's important to keep that in mind. And I also think it's important to keep in mind that the idea of purpose, the idea of having a mission and making an impact on the world is highly individualized, very much glorified by Western culture. And as I have wandered, I have found recently a Native American proverb that really resonates with me. And it's this idea of it's okay to just be a strange and beautiful thing. That's enough. And that to me is very enthralling as an idea that I could just be a strange and beautiful thing in this world, like my plants, that have all their cute little weird leaves and blooms and characteristics, and they're just a strange, beautiful thing in my space, and I also get to be that. And that opens up so much in regards to what's true, what's real, and what's possible.
Mm. How beautiful. If, in that respect, do you feel it's still important for someone to have something that fuels them, so when they wake up in the morning they feel energized and then there's a reason for them to run that business? And this gets back to what you said earlier about you felt before you started your business, you felt you needed more fulfillment in your life. So maybe there's a connection here to purpose, maybe not, but I'm just wondering, do you think it's important that someone has that reason for being in their business?
Sometimes. I think it's more important to allow that to be there and not be there. Because there's times where I feel very driven in my business. I feel very much like this is what I want to accomplish and this is what I want to do. And there's other times where I'm like, you know what? I just want to chill for a while. I'm just going to see what comes. And I'm maybe more driven by the purpose of my personal life or goals I have in those respects. And that's what's driving me to get out of bed in the morning than pushing my business to the next level. And I think it really just goes back to what I have found to be a more sustainable and fulfilling way to approach my business is with that ebb and flow, the high tide, the low tide, and allowing both to be equally okay. Because, yes, there are times when I think you do need to have focus and drive and be, have a goal. And I'm a big proponent of goals. But the goal can also be to have a year of rest, where there's just nothing. There's nothing. And that, I think there's a lot to be gained in the being, because we notice things and we're able to really, frankly, notice a lot more things that are maybe not working in our business, or things that we don't want to be doing, or things that are no longer aligned that we wouldn't have noticed if we're constantly pushing, things further down the line. And that's where it's easy to get, in my opinion, easy to get off the track, because you're moving at such a pace and such a directness that you don't realize you're off course until you're way off course. And then you're having to kind of dismantle everything. Whereas if you, kind of have this ebb and flow, you're able to recalculate, take a look at your map. Am I in the right space? That kind of thing. So I think that is more important than always having a thing.
Yeah. And as you said, especially for people that are more journeyers, meanderers, that purpose will change over time. Which is the direction of what's pulling them. And that's totally normal. And I've seen that too. And do you think more people are meanderers, wanderers, versus the Taylor Swift model, straight to the end goal?
I think in our souls we probably are. But I think we've been so cultured and so socialized to embrace that masculine, driven, direct thing that we think that that's just normal, like, where are you going to go to college? What's your major? Where are you getting the internship? What's your job? Who are you marrying? What kid how many kids are you having? Like, check. Like, what? So I think, again, we are beings of nature. And so I do think that there's probably a lot of wandering in us that we suppress. And I know I suppressed her. And I would let her come out in my little travel adventures. And it was funny because I would come back to my regular life and I would pitch a fit almost, coming back home. And I didn't realize why am I so angry at everybody and yelling at my partner? But I started to unpack it and I was like, oh, she doesn't want to go back in. Because now we're back to routine and back to what's, business. And she's like, no, there's so for me, it's been important to find ways to incorporate that side of me that does desire that. And I have found has really lined me up for where I'm at right now in my life. I can't speak to where I'll be in 10 years, where I was 20 years ago, and that's why I think, again, spending time to what are your terms? That's how you kind of reveal this stuff and figure it out, so that you can build the right path and pay attention and really build the right map, I think, is the key.
What a great message. We're coming to the end, unfortunately. How do these conversations go so quickly? I just want to keep talking. You said this in the beginning, figuring out your terms, all right, and figuring out that map. So how does someone do that? What's the first step for someone to unpack that, who's never asked themselves this question before?
For me, journaling has really been the easiest thing, so I find that written word really, works well for me. I think for people who maybe are more visual learners, images can also be helpful. I also think that there's a need to get away from everything. So when I had my quarter life crisis, I took a little mini road trip by myself. And I remember I was at this B&B where I was staying, and I like turned everything off and I sat with a blank piece of paper in front of me. And I was like, what do you like? Because I had so lost it. And I thought back to myself when I was young. And really, I would say for most people, you need to go back to like when you're like 7 or 8 young, because that's before things really start to take over, and the dismantling of you begins to make you fit into the appropriate patriarchal box among all the other boxes. But really kind of looking back at like what was I drawn to then, and allowing that to come through and to follow that thread. That was where I started. And then that just naturally leads to other stuff. There is also so many people that really do good work in this space that I think can be inspiration points. You know, I mentioned Trisha Hearsay, the NAP ministry. There's Dr. Valerie Rain, who's done a lot with patriarchy. And then, you know, I love people like Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle and, you know, just all those different people. And I really think that as you start to crack this open, you're going to get bubbles that don't make sense. Those are your desire bubbles that are percolating up because you're letting them. And they're going to be crazy. You're going to be like, what? I don't want to do that. You do. Like you want to do that. So like follow the crazy stuff, because even if it only lasts for a short time, it'll be the stepping stone to more safety, to more courage, to just, you know, all that stuff. But I think that we really ignore that, and there's so much like juice and just like allowing those really weird ideas and those really weird interests to just come forward, because that what came forward in that blank sheet of paper for me was stuff that I was like, well, kind of always wondered about that. Let me go get a book on it. So that's how I started.
Mm. Now I can see everyone's like, ooh, retreat, away, weekend, Airbnb. Yes, no devices.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, of course, that's my favorite thing to do, just like period. So it's like, do that all the time.
Okay, as we come to the close, what final tidbits or, I mean, you've given so much already. I just want to thank you for that. I am loving this. I know we could keep talking, Krista, but yeah, is there something you want to leave our listeners with as your parting message?
You know, I feel like I've said everything I wanted to. You know, I'm certainly, I so fiercely believe this is the way out. This is like the way in is the way out. And it will take courage, but when we save ourselves, everything else will naturally realign. And so I think the wholeness of humanity that we can embrace, and that we can then bring into ourselves, and then bring into our business, and allow the business to scale it to our teams, our clients. That's where there's really awesome possibility here. It's going to be weird. It's going to be scary, but it's going to save us. So,
and why not? And it'll be the life that we truly yearn for and deserve to have.
I think so.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Beautiful. So inspirational, Krista. I just want to thank you so much for bringing all of your genius and your love and your, you know, wisdom to this conversation. I'm sure that our listeners have got a lot to think about, and really grateful for you and what you're doing in the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate the space, and that we were able to connect over this. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.